The movie begins with Jo on a call with Chris, her boyfriend, rushing to get to the train. She arrives, and Chris is nervous because her parents are around, and he wants her there. Jo's phone switches off before she can tell him something, and Chris tries calling her back. Jo's parents invite Chris inside. Chris gives them Fredo's cake he got while Jo chats with a woman on the train. Chris is looking confused about how to arrange the Christmas tree lights. Dave, Jo's father, and Chris talk about Jo and Jo's absence. Chris feels overwhelmed and finally asks Dave and Nell, Jo's stepmother, how they met. Nell tells Chris it was 10 years ago, and that's why the theme for their Christmas is an ugly sweater. The story starts with Dave running to catch a train, and everyone is wearing an ugly sweater on board, except Nell. In the present, Dave calls it love at first sight, but Nell disagrees. The story continues with Dave and Nell talking, even when Dave starts the conversation with an awkward topic. When the conductor comes to take their ticket, Dave can't find it, but pulls it out just in time to hand it over. In the present, Chris learns Dave and Nell got each other's names wrong, but the couple has a defense. Chris plays with the toy train, and the story continues with Dave and Nell guessing each other's names wrongly. Dave as Gabe and Nell as Belle. The train stops and the conductor announces a delay because there's ice on the tracks. Dave and Nell notice Fredo's cake from the window, and it's their favorite. Dave has an unusual way of eating his, and they laugh. Dave offers to get her the cake, but Nell stops him because the train might leave. Dave convinces her and goes to get the cake. The conductor suddenly announces that the track is clear, and the train leaves Dave behind. In the present, Chris tells Dave and Nell about meeting Jo at his company 9 months ago. Chris's company was to do some accounting for Jo's company. Chris had walked into the wrong conference room, stammered, and excused himself. Jo followed him out, which was the beginning of their love story. Chris wants Dave and Nell's story to continue their story. They tell him finding something seems impossible without determination. The movie shifts to the past, where Dave tells Jo about Nell and how they got separated. Jo tells her father that he's only known her for 10 minutes, but Dave knows she's the one. Jo asks Dave if he knew her mother was the one, and he says yes, plus they were young. Jo is surprised Dave doesn't have any information about Nell. Meanwhile, Nell and Izzy, her best friend, have a friendly banter about Nell flirting and forgetting her ex-fiancé, Eli. Izzy announces that the Christmas arbor has been approved, and Nell isn't in support, as the town doesn't have that much money. Jo finds Dave's phone and tells him the festival has been approved. Dave is excited but unsure since it's his first time working the event since Gramps. Jo praises his efforts and reads the email, which ends with the town's controller, Eleanor, Nell, in the email. Nell tells Izzy she's going to call Dave but gets an email from Eli and his new girlfriend. Dave calls Nell and finds her voice familiar. Nell tells him she isn't in on the Christmas party and they argue about their points. In the present, Chris finishes decorating the tree and Nell congratulates him. Jo's seat partner is giving her a lecture on types of ugly Christmas sweaters when the conductor announces a slight delay. Nell brings the cookies from the oven and notices Chris's worried look. He hopes Jo is okay and she asks if he's comfortable with them. Chris tells her his parents aren't that big on Christmas, and Nell admits she used to be like that until she met Dave. Chris feels the same about Jo and wants to know how Dave and Nell finally met again. David continues the story, and it shifts to the past, where Dave and Jo are walking on the street, and Jo is giving him a lecture on the road budget she made to send to Eleanor after getting to the cafe. Jo gets to the cafe while Dave stares at a couple of porcelain dolls. Jo places her orders and sends Nell the new budget, but Nell disagrees with her. Nell bumps into Dave, realizing they got each other's name wrong. They talk, and Dave tells Nell he has a fabulous 16-year-old daughter and is divorced. He offers to take Nell for hot chocolate. She agrees, and Nell sends Jo a response to reduce the budget to 1/4 of the cost. Jo sends Dave an SOS message, but her phone switches off when he tries to call her. Dave begs Nell to wait for him while he looks for Jo. Dave eventually finds Jo and tells her he found Nell. He bumps into someone on his way out, spilling the drink, and has to queue to get the man a new drink. Nell has to move when the patrol officer arrives and tells Nell that her car is parked on a fire hydrant. Dave comes out and is downcast when he can't find Nell. Nell returns, but Dave isn't there. In the present, Jo texts Dave, telling him that her phone is down and the train isn't moving. Dave continues narrating the story. Nell tells Izzy that Dave might not be into her, and Dave tells Jo the same thing. Both Jo and Izzy ask them to post a missed connection on the internet or look on social media. Jo gets on the internet when Dave leaves and sends a missed connection. Back in the present, Chris and Dave are outside. Dave shows Chris around. He shows Chris the Christmas market, and Dave tells him that's where he and Nell changed numbers. Chris still doesn't believe they couldn't search for each other on Facebook. Dave responds jokingly that despite being married to Nell for 8 years, they still communicate by telegram. Back in the past, Joe reminds Dave of his meeting with Eleanor by 4 p.m. Chloe, Joe's mother, arrives with gifts. Joe leaves, and Chloe offers to help with the house. Dave and Chloe playfully bicker about Dan, Chloe's husband. Dave explains his dilemma to Chloe. Nell complains to Izzy about Dave's messy budget. Izzy is tired of Nell's complaints, and Nell buys a flower. Nell tells Izzy that Dave is the opposite of Eli. Chloe advises Dave to be more focused and find someone with focus. Nell and Dave meet again at the Christmas market, and Dave apologizes for the other day. They explain how they missed each other by chance. Dave wanted to take her number but forgot his phone. He tries to memorize her number, and Nell takes his number just to be on the safe side. They find each other's number familiar and leave because they have a meeting to catch up on. David recites the numbers and gets them mixed up while Nell trips and her phone breaks. Nell gets a new phone and complains to Izzy about everything. She is mad about the organizer missing the meeting and wants to send him an email to cancel the festival. Dave, however, is optimistic despite missing the meeting because Nell has his number. At present, Joe is bored of listening to her seat partner, and the conductor announces that the train can't move and everyone needs to get off. Joe calls Chris at a restaurant, complains of a cold, and tells him everything. Chris wants to come to pick her up, but she refuses, wanting him not to miss the party. Dave continues to explain the story to Chris. The scene moves back to the past. Nell and Izzy talk about Nell's building romance. Izzy gets a message and leaves. Nell checks her laptop and is happy to see Dave is searching for her. Joe receives her father's text and replies to Nell. She invites Nell to be Dave's date for the party that night. Joe tells Dave what happened and that he needs her help finding what to wear. In the present, Chris feels lonely at the party, so Chloe and Nell take him away to talk. Chris confesses that he has never told anyone he loves them and wants to tell Joe. The women tell him that he'll find the perfect moment to tell her. Chris wants the continuation of the story of Dave and Nell. Nell starts, and the scene moves to Nell taking a deep breath before going into Dave's house with the fruitcake. She spots Dave, and he comes to her. Joe makes Dave take the cake, and he introduces Joe to Nell. When Nell and Dave dance, Nell admits to wanting to belong, and she finds out Dave is the festival's organizer she has been quarreling with. She leaves Dave, who is confused about what went wrong. Back to the present. Joe is driving in a truck, and she tells the driver her love story. She isn't happy that Chris and she haven't said the words "I love you" to each other. Chris is having coffee while Nell cooks. He expresses his doubts about himself and Joe to Nell, so she tells him to talk to Joe about it. Chris wants her to continue the story, so she does. Back to the past. Nell tells Izzy what she found out and doubts that she and Dave are a match. Izzy wants Nell to come clean to Dave because he's going to find out at the festival. Nell reveals she ghosted Dave. Meanwhile, Dave complains to Joe, and she tells him to be assertive and call Nell, but Dave doesn't have her number. Joe also wants him to complete the chair, but Dave isn't sure he's up to it. Joe convinces him, and she discovers Eleanor has ghosted Dave's emails. Joe and Dave go to see Eleanor, but her receptionist has them wait. Joe discovers Nell is Eleanor when she goes to pee, and she leaves with Dave. Nell comes out to see no one, and the receptionist tells her that Dave had been there. Nell tells Izzy what happened at lunch, and Izzy encourages her to reach out, but Nell wants to disappear. Izzy tells Nell to send an email to Dave and leaves for a meeting. Nell keeps trying to send proper mail to Dave. She gets one from Dave asking to meet, but she meets Joe instead. In the present, Chris, Dave, and Nell are outside, and both couples leave to handle Dave's mistake when Chris notices Joe. They hug, and Chris learns he wasn't supposed to ask her parents how they met. Nell continues telling the story, and the scene moves to Joe, confessing to chatting with Nell in Dave's place. They have a hearty talk. Joe begs Nell to give her father a chance and plans the arrangements. Nell meets Dave with a fruitcake, and they start again. She admires his works, and almost slips that she's Eleanor. They talk, and share their fears. Dave tells Nell he likes her. At work the next day, Nell informs Izzy about the romantic moments, and reveals she didn't tell Dave who she was. At present, Joe and Chris are decorating a gingerbread cake, and he gets heartbroken when Joe interrupts his impending proposal. She leaves to get a napkin, and Nell walks up to him. She comforts him and tells him she knows the feeling. The scene changes to Nell praising Dave's work on the finished chair, and he lets her know she is his inspiration. Nell tries to tell David she is Eleanor, but David ruins it by his judgments. Nell tells Dave to take on some responsibilities, but he disappears when he gets distracted by the inspector. The inspector calls the festival a major fire hazard and leaves. In the present, Joe and Dave have a heart-to-heart talk. She reveals she ran off before Chris told her he loved her. The scene shifts to the past where Nell and Izzy talk about Nell running away from Dave. Izzy advises Nell and motivates her. Dave decorates the Christmas tree and Nell appears, telling him she likes him. But the inspector accidentally reveals Nell is Eleanor when he gives her the inspection file. Nell apologizes to Dave and expresses her feelings, but Dave rejects her. In the present day, Joe finds Chris, and they end up breaking each other's hearts. Chris leaves, and Joe is upset, but her parents console her. The scene moves to the past, and Joe lets her father know that she has known for some time that Eleanor was Nell. Joe cheers David. At the festival, Nell tells Izzy that Dave doesn't want her to attend, but Izzy refuses. Chloe convinces Dave to go to Nell, and Izzy does the same to Nell. In the present, Joe sends a text to Chris, telling him she loves him. Dave and Nell advise her to go find him. The movie shifts to the past. David and Nell are looking for each other. They meet, apologize, and kiss. At present time, Chris returns to the party and finds Joe. They confess their feelings and kiss. Dave and Nell are dancing behind them. Chris's family arrives at Joe's home by Christmas morning, and the movie ends with Chris's parents asking how Dave and Nell met.